Welcome back into the Mental Game. I'm your host, Brandon Saho, and this week's guest is a bucket list one for me. It is legendary journalist Chris Hansen. You all know him best from Dateline NBC's To Catch a Predator, but he is an amazing investigative journalist that's been doing it for, I think, 4 decades now, and this was an awesome interview for me. Chris and I got to ask him his famous line, to have a seat in Times Square in New York City where we shot this episode, but Chris talks about his long journalism career, all the investigations he's done. Obviously, we dive a lot into the To Catch a Predator series and also the new show he's doing on True Blue and just all of the Predator series and investigations he's done over his long, successful career. It's really interesting to get the insight from him as he has been face-to-face with dozens, if not hundreds, of child predators. And we talk a lot about mental health, giving advice to parents for what they should tell their kids or what they should look out for on the internet with all these different dating apps and social media platforms. So, like I said, this was an amazing conversation with a bucket list guest for me. So without further ado, here on the Mental Game, here is Chris Hansen. Welcome back into the Mental Game. As you can see, I'm joined by a very special guest, Chris Hansen, formerly of To Catch a Predator, now Takedown with Chris Hansen on True Blue. Chris, I appreciate you coming on.
Well, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, this is going to be a really fun conversation. We are at Times Square here in New York City, and you've been really busy with work. You guys launched this new show, about a year ago?
We did. So we have Takedown with Chris Hansen, which is the new Predator series, the investigations, on True Blue, which is our new streaming crime network, which we launched about 4 months ago.
Yeah, the reception and the viewership looks like it has been out of this world so far. Obviously, you have a long history in this space. We'll get into all that here on the episode. But first thing I ask everyone is, what does mental health mean to you? And people answer it in a variation of ways, whether it's something they discovered at a younger age or maybe more recent in life, or there was a traumatic event that made that mental health awareness come to the forefront for them. But I ask you the same thing. What does mental health mean to you?
Mental health, to me, means being honest with yourself about your emotions, your feelings. And again, honesty without compassion and understanding is just sort of being somewhat brutal.
Right.
So you need to measure what you do every day in your relationships and to be honest with yourself about what you need to be healthy. Your mental health is just as important as your physical health.
For you, you always knew that you wanted to be a journalist, from my understanding, young age, 14, 15, kind of the same story as me, as you picked it up and you're like, all right, this is what I wanted to do. What attracted you to journalism?
I'm very fortunate, very blessed to have figured out something I think I do pretty well.
Yeah.
Over the
I'll
years.
agree. I think you do okay.
You do okay. 40 years or so, you start to figure it out. You know? But I grew up about a mile and a half from where Jimmy Hoffa, the Teamsters president at one time, was last seen and presumably kidnapped. And so I used to ride my bike up there at the age of 14, 15 years old, and I was fascinated by the whole story. And the cops and the FBI and the reporters, the television news reporters from the networks and the local stations. So I kind of got bit by the bug then. And when I went off to Michigan State University, on day one, I went and signed up for the campus radio news network, the Michigan State Radio Network, and it started.
You bounced around. You've done the local TV thing all the way up to NBC, and now we said you're at True Blue. Walk me through that career as a young, hungry journalist. I think did you start in Lansing? Is that right?
I did start in Lansing. So in those days, it was 1981, which is when I graduated from Michigan State. But I was working in radio for WJIM, and they had TV as well as CBS.
Gotcha, okay.
And so they were right next to each other. So in the evenings, I would go over and help the anchor, Howard Lancour, God bless his soul, wonderful human being, and a great mentor, write copy.
Okay.
And so he got a job at the NBC station, not just being the main anchor, but being the news director. And I took him out, one night, and we had about 20 scotches, and I convinced him at Wynn Schuler's in East Lansing, Michigan, I convinced him to hire me part-time. I said, if I'm horrible,
What's it gonna
you can
cost?
fire me.
Yeah.
It costs you $4.90 an hour, which is what I made in that first job. And so he said, all right, good, get going. And so I did it, and I covered every city council meeting and fire and breaking news story there was for $4.90 an hour, part-time, the second half of my senior year. So when I graduated, he graciously hired me full-time, and I became the 5-day-a-week reporter covering the state capitol, and I anchored the news on Saturdays.
Yep, and you went from there to, is it Tampa, then back to Detroit?
Tampa for a couple years, 2.5 years, and that was a wonderful experience because we really got to see, I got to see a big chunk of the world in Tampa. We got to cover riots in Miami. They'd put us in Central America when the main network news correspondents were off on vacation. So we saw a lot, and I got to know Don Brown, who was then the Miami bureau chief, who later became vice president of NBC News, and that's how I got to NBC.
That's what I was going to ask you. The grind of local TV and bouncing around, moving to different cities. You're born in Chicago, from Michigan, but you get to work in your home state. I'm sure that had to be a really cool thing.
That was a dream come true. My entire goal in life was to be a street reporter for Channel 7 Action News under the anchor Bill Bonds. I mean, that was it. What more could you possibly want out of life than to make a decent salary and be on Channel 7 every night?
Yeah.
And that's where I got to go after Tampa.
That's incredible. And that's the cool thing for me, as I told you before we started rolling. A lot of listeners know this. Grew up in Cincinnati, bounced around, got to go back, cover my favorite teams as a sports reporter, reporting on the Bengals, Reds, University of Cincinnati, all that jazz. It's a super rewarding thing, but the grind of it, like, can you walk me back, because it was a different time, and I'm not trying to age you on this.
No, it's public record.
But I mean, this is tape. This is no social media.
No,
this is
no social media.
There's
tape.
only a 6 and 11.
Yeah,
like
we didn't even, when I started at Channel 7, we didn't even have a noon, because it was an ABC O&O. So they, network programming rode right through till 5, 6, and 11.
Yeah.
And so that's what we had. And I watched that evolution. We had live trucks, obviously.
Right.
And it was an incredible experience to work for Channel 7, that ABC O&O, in the 7th largest market in America at that time. And it was great. Detroit was so competitive. I mean, we didn't just try to beat the other TV stations. We tried to beat the newspapers.
Yeah.
And it was super competitive. And you wanted, every day you went out there, I did, wanting your competition to fear you. That's how competitive it was.
I think local media is still very competitive, but not like it used to be.
It was great. I mean, and I think my competitors would say the same thing. It was great fun. And I think it's a little less so today with cooperation, but I remember we were covering a major story on a child killer who had escaped to Florida, and we had to get the story back. And so there weren't satellite trucks just yet. They were about to develop, but there was a satellite station in Marion County, Florida.
Okay.
And it was so competitive that my executive producer in Detroit bought all the satellite time from 4 p.m. until midnight, so the competition couldn't get their stuff out. And
That's
the other
awesome.
reporters, who I was friendly with, came to me and said, "Hey, can you?" I don't know how it works. Now everything's brokered, everything is shared, and everybody said, have some competition. Let the other guys at least get their material out. You can try and beat them, but I mean, that's how competitive it was in those days.
Sure, and the field's super competitive too. And so for you to be able to make it all the way up to NBC and become a huge figure in news nationally and around the world, I'm sure had to be a dream come true for you. But
absolutely.
But were there times where you wanted to give up, or there were times where it was tough in those first few years, getting your breaks or getting back to Michigan, getting to Tampa?
Yeah. And again, I have no complaints.
Yeah.
And I've had a blessed career. Internally, obviously, you have difficult moments. You have questions about, how much is too much in terms of what you put into work. But I never really looked back. I never second-guessed it. And I guess I'm very fortunate in that way, because I never really had any crisis of conscience about it. And maybe I just never analyzed it too deeply. People ask me all the time, do you ever go to therapy? Do you talk to somebody about all the dark things you've seen? And I do talk to people. I've never really formally done therapy, but I have a whole network of people to whom I speak, which essentially, for me, in my unique individual situation, accomplishes that same goal.
Yeah.
I have outlets for it, and that's what you need to do.
That's what I was going to ask and I was going to get into this a little bit, but you touched on therapy. So have you ever gone to therapy? Have you considered it, or have you had that network of family, friends, people that are in the business that you can vent to, and that's good enough for you? Because everyone's answer is different.
It's a very individual specific
Right.
need, and mental health is that way. And formally, no. And I want to be very clear that I think it's a very great option.
Mm-hmm.
On my podcast, one of the mental health providers is a sponsor.
Yeah.
And I encourage it. And especially today where you can do remote
Right.
therapy and you can talk to somebody
Yeah.
and let them see your picture or not,
Mm-hmm.
do video or sound. I think it's essential, especially for young people today who face a myriad of pressures that we didn't face. Social media, we're doing a big documentary for True Blue on sextortion. All these things, if these kids would take a minute and talk to somebody about it, realize it's not that bad.
Right.
I mean, therapy is really, really important for a lot of people.
I agree.
And I'm an advocate.
Yeah, and it saved my life. And I think the thing I try to remind everyone that watches or listens to this show, or when I see them out, is that everything is temporary. Those feelings, the bullshit you go through, it is all temporary.
Look, we've all sadly, I don't know if you have or not, but by the time you get to my age, you'll have lost, statistically, somebody
right.
through suicide. Mm-hmm. And it's heart-wrenching. And you wrestle with, how does this person do that? One minute they're a network executive helping your kid out with something, and the other minute wait, what?
Right.
They're gone. And for what at the end of the day? For what?
Yeah, and a lot of people go, "Oh, I had no idea," or they didn't, and that's why
I've been shocked more than a handful of times by people I know who've done it, and you can't explain it. It's very frustrating. There's often no rhyme or reason, except for the fact that if this person had gotten help and gotten
right.
through that 30 minutes or 3 hours where they were despondent and contemplating taking their own life, they'd be past it.
Yep.
And we'd not be having that discussion about those individuals.
Right. No, it's super sad. And I think, obviously, the place I checked in Cincinnati, and then, like, my mom, I just couldn't imagine my mom not having, going through the death of a child. That would literally kill her. And so those were the things that helped me get through those tough times about a year ago, or a little over a year ago. I want to get into NBC now.
Sure.
You get the call to go to NBC, and this, like I said before, has to be a dream come true for you. Walk me through the emotions of getting brought on, and then seeing the rise, because you came on early, and Dateline and To Catch a Predator, that wasn't on the radar yet.
Way later. No, it wasn't. I mean, I actually came. The first offer was to go to London.
Oh, wow. Okay, I didn't know that.
And they rescinded that because of budget cuts after the first Iraq War in 1991.
Yeah.
93, they came back and said, look, we're doing this other news magazine, not Dateline, but another one,
right.
because that was all the craze then, and we want you to be a correspondent on it. So my first job was with Now, which was a short-lived news magazine on Wednesday nights at 9. The executive producer was Jeff Zucker, and then Katie Couric and Tom Brokaw anchored it. So we did that for a year, and they merged that all into Dateline, and so I just moved right over to Dateline.
Right, and I think it's crazy to me to look back at your resume and everything that you've done, because you've covered wars. I think you're part of the 9/11 coverage.
Yep.
There's a lot of things that you mentioned before we started rolling. You've won 10 Emmys, and was it right that none of them involved To Catch a Predator?
No, nominated for the very first To Catch a Predator.
Yeah.
But it kind of bothered some people in the old school network of Scarlet Jade journalists that
right.
we would do something that was so out there, different, I suppose. It
Yeah.
was intimidating, and some old timers said, "Well, you're working too closely with the police and blah 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 and this that, and everything." And I said, "Look, this is what we have to do to capture the commission of a felony and to take our viewers into this world to understand what a predator's mind
right.
is like, and to better protect their children from becoming predators." And we still do it today. We've evolved, but it's still an important mission of mine.
When NBC and Dateline came to you with this project, To Catch a Predator, was supposed to be a one-off, and what were your first thoughts?
Well, actually, I went to them with it.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So what happened was I became aware of this online watchdog group,
Yeah.
for Justice, and at the time, they had, contributors who would pose as kids online, and if they proposed meeting a child for sex, they would post that person's identity on their website.
Right.
And they'd embarrass them and expose them and, try to dissuade others from doing the same thing.
Right.
And I thought if we could use their expertise as decoys online and combine it with our ability to wire a house with hidden cameras and microphones, it could be compelling. So I pitched it. And they said, okay, do it. And so we run a house in Bethpage, Long Island.
Yeah.
We didn't partner with law enforcement in those first two
Right.
investigations, there and later in Virginia. And I'm wondering if anybody's going to show up. I mean, I'm thinking, what if I've just wasted tens of thousands of dollars of the network's money? And in minutes, as I'm driving out there, my producer calls me on the cell phone and says, where the hell are you? We've got 2 guys scheduled in 45 minutes. And before the end of the 2.5 days, 17 guys surfaced, including a New York City firefighter. And I thought, oh my God.
Did that shock you?
Yes.
It's when you watch the show and you're someone that is I don't know if this is the right way to say it, but you are the show. I mean, you've been there. There's a lot of hardworking people behind the scenes, whether it be
absolutely.
cameraman, audio,
producers,
law enforcement. But there's one of one view from your seat in that show. What was it like those first few episodes, watching these men walk in and having that conversation?
Well, the first investigation, I was just trying to keep my heart out of my throat and in my chest.
Yeah.
And the guy comes in and I confront him and I've got the transcripts and he leaves. And, we've got security there. Ron Knight, my security guy, was there from NBC at the time. And so we felt pretty protected. But he leaves. Another guy shows up. Do it again. Third guy shows up. And now the transcripts of the chats are all mixed together on the dining room table. Again, the first time we did it, we didn't have the system done.
Right.
So I walk out with the wrong set of transcripts. And I say to the guy, it says, here, you want to do this with the 12-year-old. No, it's not me. Go back. Second one, still wrong. Third one, well, a 14-year-old girl named Beth. Yeah, that's me. Okay. And we start the conversation. But it was crazy behind the scenes. And so we had a much more organized approach when we did the second investigation in Herndon, Virginia. Mm-hmm. And some of those cases were, in fact, prosecuted even though we didn't collaborate with law enforcement.
Right.
And then by the third one, we had the opportunity to work with the Riverside County Sheriff's Department. And we made the decision that it was socially responsible not to work with law enforcement because you need to ensure that these prosecutions take place.
Right.
And also, just purely from a television production standpoint, it was unfulfilling for the viewer to see these guys just go off into the wind.
Right. They don't, wherever they go, and they know that's I think you learn a lot watching To Catch a Predator. Like, as someone like me that's not in law enforcement or doesn't know how everything works, and learning, we're going to get into the mental health side of it in just a second, but just learning what these guys do and what is wrong, the different things that they can get in trouble for, and the show's success. Like, when did you know that this was going to be something that was going to stick around more than just a one-off?
Well, after the first one aired, and again, we shot the very first investigation in February of 2004, didn't air until September.
Okay.
And quite honestly, looking back, I think the network executives were nervous about it.
Oh,
I said,
yeah.
what do we got here? How do we promote this? What do we do? And finally, in exasperation, I had a very clear conversation with a team of executives. And it aired shortly thereafter. And, predictably, it got a lot of attention. And so we did it, and then we got busy with some other things, and we decided to do it again. Mm-hmm. And this time, it really got attention. We had a guy who was a rabbi show up, a guy who walked in naked, a guy who was a military intelligence officer. We had a teacher, special education teacher.
Yeah.
And so, oh my God, all these characters. And they all wanted to have sex with a child. And so by the time we did it a third time, 51 guys showed up in 3 days. So then it was, all of a sudden, people were really paying attention to this.
Right.
But regardless of how much attention it got, guys kept showing up. Guys still show up 19 years later. We have an episode that will drop on the day of this recording.
Yeah.
A 54-year-old guy on True Blue who admitted to me after driving from Chicago to Dayton, Ohio, that he had done this before with teenage girls. And he shows up with a backpack that has condoms, lubricant, spermicide, day after pills, and a vape pen. And it's a sex kit to have sex with a child. And he specifically talked about instances where he had done this before, knew exactly who I was. And continued to talk. It's shocking to me. But what it tells me is, in spite of the increased awareness that I think the Predator series has achieved, the internet has exploded in terms of social media platforms.
Right.
And there are more platforms upon which an adult can approach a child than ever before. And it's not going away.
Right.
So the awareness is there. It's increased vastly, but the opportunity has also exponentially increased. So it's not going away.
Right.
So you need to create this wall of protection informationally around your children. And you need to explain to them from the very first moments they're online that there are adults out there who want to trick you.
Right.
And you need to monitor and continue this discussion.
Have you felt like over the years that you have raised a ton of awareness for this, and I think it's brought it to public? There's been groups like Perverted Justice and other ones that on their own have probably tried to speak at schools or tried to raise awareness on their own, but having a network behind it and having a public figure like yourself who has done that and has experience with, taking down these predators, I think it just brings more awareness. But like you said, it's still a problem that is, it shocks me, like watching your new stuff now, where like you said, somebody will come on to Takedown with Chris Hansen, and they know exactly who you are when you walk out. Or
it goes even further than that, in that many times in the chats, they will say, "Is this a Chris Hansen deal?" Or they may name the local sheriff where we're working, who happens to be proactive in this field. I mean, whether it's Grady Judd in Polk County or Chris Swanson in Genesee County, or any of the sheriffs we work with.
Right.
These guys know it, but people always say to me, "God, they must be stupid. They must be dumb. How could they fall for this? These idiots." They're not. They're smart. They talk about the risk of getting caught in specific detail. Mm-hmm. I could go to jail for this. You're too young. I really want this. But what it tells me, and again, I'm not a therapist, but what it tells me is that the urge for some people to have sex with a minor, with a child, is so strong that they can't control it.
Yeah.
And they show up in spite of all the potential danger to them.
I was going to ask you about the mental health side of what you witness. Do you talk to therapists, psychiatrists, doctors about what you're experiencing and what I hate to phrase it in the way of what's wrong with them, but there is obviously something wrong with the people that show up to these houses to try to engage in sex acts with kids. What do the professionals tell you about these mental health issues?
I think there is a lot of very important work going on in this space, and I've talked to a number of therapists and psychiatrists over the years who deal with these guys, and will talk about how close to offending many of these guys come, but they don't. I got a letter to the Predators I've Caught podcast a few weeks ago from a guy saying, I am predisposed to this activity, but because of therapy, partly because I watched your show over the years, I have made a promise to myself that I'll never be one of those guys. I've never offended, but thank you for doing it. And I think they break down into three categories. Again, I'm not a therapist, but based upon what I've seen over 19 years, you've got the hardcore heavy hitters. For whatever reason, they're wired that way. They were abused as a child themselves. They will offend no matter what.
Right. Got to
be locked up. That's a third of them. The other third are young opportunists.
Yeah.
Feel that they can get away with this because, she's only 13, 14, but I'm 19, 20, 21.
Right.
At some point it'll catch up. Who's going to know? And then you've got this more fascinating, vexing category in the middle, the professional, the doctor, the lawyer, the middle-aged man who knows it's wrong and wouldn't be doing this without the internet, the 24/7 access, the addictive quality, and the anonymity. People start saying things that they wouldn't say face-to-face.
Right.
And that's historically one of the issues with the internet. And you get these guys who get themselves worked up to the point where they can't see the line between fantasy and reality, and they offend. And that's the more vexing issue. Some of these guys can get treatment and punishment and never offend again. And I see that when I go back to the previous cases in the podcast. The vast majority of these guys, as far as we can tell, don't reoffend. Some do. We caught a guy in the latest sting in Ohio. 2 weeks later, he's in a different county getting arrested for having sex with a minor. 2 weeks.
That is insane.
After being confronted by me
with a camera
and
crew.
the Montgomery County Sheriff's Department.
Yeah, with the camera crew, with police.
Yeah, the whole thing. And 2 weeks later, he's arrested again in a different county, neighboring county.
And that just shows you, one, how big of a problem this is. I'm sure it has to be, I don't know if rewarding is the right word, but rewarding for you when you see these predators taken into custody, or you know that this isn't a real thing, that this was a decoy. Has that been something that has been rewarding for you,
Absolutely,
taking pride in your work?
No, I think it's the most important thing we've done is raise awareness and create a dialogue that hasn't existed before. And I also think that, journalistically, the lesson is that enterprise reporting using techniques like hidden cameras and microphones and embedding and collaborating sometimes with law enforcement allows us to take people into a world they wouldn't normally see. They hear things they wouldn't normally hear. They see things they wouldn't normally see. Mm-hmm. And it's very compelling television.
Have you, when you're standing there and you get into this conversation and you see men that start breaking down and they have so many different issues, including this attraction to young kids, are there a part of you that just the human emotion element feels bad when they're talking about how terrible their life is or what's going on?
I don't take any pleasure into seeing somebody's life, get destroyed in front of cameras. Do they deserve it? Of course they do.
Right.
But it doesn't give me any pleasure or glee. I think it gives me some satisfaction that a bad guy has been exposed, that person may get treatment or will get punishment that will prevent them from offending again. Yeah, that's very rewarding. But from a human level, it's disturbing still. But I think it's a necessary part of our portfolio at True Blue, and we will continue to do it.
I want to ask you about a situation that combines To Catch a Predator and mental health with, I believe it was in Texas with an assistant district attorney who you guys had tried to get to the Sting house, and then the police were going to his house the next day, and he ended up dying by suicide. When something happens like that's involving your work and your show, how does that affect your mental health? How do you wrap your mind around that situation?
It was shocking. It was horrible. You never want to see that happen. But when you dig a little deeper, in this case, you can see why it happened. Nobody wanted that to happen.
Right.
But you had an assistant district attorney who, as it turned out, we later found had multiple images of child pornography on his computer before he decided to take his own life, as police were going to arrest him for his activity online the evening before in the Sting operation. He was trying to get this hard drive out and couldn't do it, and the police came in and said, "Guys, don't worry, I'm not going to hurt you," and shot himself in the head. Now, later we find out not only was there the child pornography for which he could have spent many years in prison, there was evidence on that computer that was recovered that led to the prosecution of the assistant district attorney's boss, the actually elected district attorney. Wow. And based upon the information that was on that laptop, the DA went to federal prison.
Wow.
And so it's a much more detailed, corrupt story.
Right.
And so, the assistant district attorney knew this and knew he was in trouble for the child porn. He knew he could be in trouble for the information detailing the corruption of his boss in office. So, we happened to catch somebody who was dirty on a couple different levels.
Wow. That is, it is just crazy to think about how many levels there are to everything. The pop culture part of this, where you instantly become a household name from the To Catch a Predator series. You're on South Park, you're on whatever TV show, Mad TV, was that weird for you?
It was a little bit at first. I joke around. My two older kids went to high school in Connecticut, and they went to a high school where kids' dads did a lot of cool stuff.
Yeah.
Sports figures, Wall Street figures, titans of industry. So to have a dad on television wasn't a big deal until South Park did a Chris Hansen Predator episode. Then I was the cool dad.
Yeah.
But, look, it comes with the territory. I don't mind being made fun of or satirized if it brings attention to a very important topic. And the reality of it is that all this attention and notoriety works in my favor as we do different stories on different topics. It gives me access at virtually whatever law enforcement agency I need to get somebody to do an interview, to work on a very important story. It's sextortion, for instance.
Yeah.
The Tracy Hoodsana con woman case, where Jumana Kidd, the former wife of Jason Kidd, was bilked out of $3 million. I mean, that was a great NYPD case. They trust me to go in there and do an interview with their people.
Right.
They know I'll ask, important, hard questions, but that whole experience and the notoriety from the Predator investigation allows me to have the credibility to get what I need on a lot of different fronts for a lot of different very important projects and stories.
The popularity of the show, because of the important work you're doing, I think is number one, and the men going into custody and then not being able to do this to children. That is the number one reason why the show gained popularity and had the success it did. Some of the men that walked in, though, I think what they did, what they said, that helped this show go viral or grow and have an even bigger impact. What was, if I can ask this in a sensitive enough way, what was the craziest, weirdest thing you saw? I know I think there's two guys that walked in naked. There's a guy you had the day after. And that one for me was like, how this man.
Well, it's insane. I mean, imagine a guy shows up naked, and the decoy was playing kind of a cheeky role and raised the issue, and so the guy did it.
Right.
And then the next day I hear all this commotion in the room where the perverted justice contributors were working. And I go up there to see what's going on. They said, "We remember the guy who walked in naked, John Kennelly." I said, "Yeah, how could I forget?" He said, "He's in another chat room trying to hook up with another 13-year-old kid." I said, "Oh my God, who does this?" So there are moments like that. There are moments like, when a rabbi, a man of God walks in.
Right.
There are moments when a doctor walks in. We had a doctor in a recent investigation in Michigan, 61-year-old doctor, who was chatting with the decoy at his office as he saw 18 patients and then sent an obscene picture of himself in the course of his day seeing patients. A family practitioner who presumably sees young women as part of his practice. And then he walks in and he grabs the decoy from behind. And this is one of our recent episodes on True Blue. And it's shocking. And then he admits the whole thing. But this is a guy who's a doctor, 61 years old.
Yeah.
In mid-Michigan. And we've recently had a 70-year-old guy. And the episode I just told you about, this guy's 54. They come from all walks of life. We had a guy who came in the last investigation in Ohio who saw me after, he stopped for milkshakes for the boy he was going to visit. And he got startled and it spilled it all over the place. And he goes to sit down on the couch. And I walk out and he says, "Oh, no, I'm not doing this. I'm Chris Hansen. And he's imitating me." I said, "Don't you think that's going to go viral?"
Yeah.
I mean, it's every one we do, there's a memorable pop culture moment.
Right. And I think that's the crazy thing to me. People still show up but it shows the problem that is at hand. I want to go through the timeline of you at NBC to where you are now. We've talked a lot about To Catch a Predator and the investigations you've done and the great work you've done in your journalism career. But your time at Dateline, when did you leave NBC?
Left NBC in 2013.
Okay.
And then had a show for a number of years, 3 years on investigation discovery. Did a syndicated crime show called Crime Watch Daily. Produced and reported for a couple of documentaries on Discovery Plus, and then came True Blue.
Yeah, and
a great timing for it.
Yeah, no, it has exploded, and the content you're doing now, the shows, it just, like we've talked about, it shows that this is still a problem. We need this programming. When you left NBC, was that hard for you when that had been something that was a big staple in your career for a long time?
No, it was the next logical step. I mean, it was a situation where Dateline was getting away from doing the kinds of investigative things that I like to do.
Yeah.
And it was becoming more of a murder procedural. And that's great. That's very popular and very important. Mm-hmm. And those guys are great friends of mine over there to this day. And I have the utmost of respect for everybody at Dateline. But it was just going in a different direction than what I was excited about. And so I had these other opportunities, the syndicated show, and the Discovery Plus, and all the things that came along since then. And I'm thankful that I had 21 years at NBC, because I wouldn't have been able to do everything I've done since without that time. And that's the job that gave me the platform to do everything I've done since. So I'm grateful. And look, it's, everybody's on good terms. It was a wonderful experience. I mean, how often do you get to work in the same place for 21 years?
Not many people can say that, or at least a place that they love doing the job that they do. And you were lucky enough to say that.
Look, everything evolves, everything changes. And so, I had a brand that I was able to translate into something ultimately at True Blue, where we own the content, we own the distribution of the content, we turn it around much quicker than we can anywhere else. These 2 documentaries I did at Discovery Plus, again, love the Discovery people, but they were 18 months to 2 years from start to finish.
Right.
The bureaucracy can kill you.
Yeah.
And I understand how it works, and I get it, but we do things now in a much quicker fashion. And from the time that I get an idea or somebody comes to me with a topic, and the time it's actually on True Blue is
a month?
Sometimes.
Yeah.
Sometimes less.
Yeah. And the turnaround time that like we said, helps raise awareness and gets out there.
The streaming world is like that. So if the most recent Takedown episode is 40 minutes, it's 40 minutes. If it's 12 minutes, it's 12 minutes. It is what we deem it to be.
Yeah. And I was going to ask you, having this platform and having the background, the career you do, I have to imagine that you love having that creative freedom now, because you're a co-founder in True Blue. Like we've mentioned, Takedown with Chris Hansen. It is very similar to the Predator investigations you've done before, but I think it shows because if you left in 2012, 2013 from NBC, I know you had done some investigations in between, but you're showing a new era of Predator activity. Can you just walk us through what that's been like? Because there's different apps, but you're seeing the same problem.
There's so many more different apps today than imagine when we started at NBC, we merely had decoys in chat rooms on AOL and Yahoo.
Yeah.
Well, today, you can't even keep track of them.
No.
Every week. And then I have, law enforcement coming to me saying, hey, these other guys you work with, do they use this, or what, how does that work? And there are entire platforms that cater to guys who have a fetish for daddy-daughter or mother-daughter. And we see this. We see these very specific conversations about people who are geared this way. And when I interview them, they'll talk about all the problems and why they got here and everything else, and that's legit. But still, if I wasn't there, and there was a child there would have been the rape of a child.
Yeah.
These sexual exploitation. And many times these guys come with the notion of, documenting it on video or with photos, and that all feeds into the child pornography rings.
Right, and I think that just shows how important this work is, and it's very interesting to hear you describe the different situations and talk about everything that's gone on over the years, and that the same problems still exist. For you, what have you learned the most about yourself throughout these past 20, 30 years doing these investigations, where it's the same career, it's the same type of investigation and work, but you're growing up, you're changing, life's changing, in your personal life and different things. What have you learned the most?
That's a great question. And I suppose the thing I've learned the most is that you need to have a certain amount of patience in your work, some intellectual integrity in your work, some emotional maturity in your work. Anybody can jump out of the back room or from around the corner and create 10 seconds of dramatic video. My job is to be patient, to be thoughtful, to get inside this person's head and try to understand it, and by doing that, prevent other people from becoming victims. And I think that maturity and that curiosity, whether it's a Predator story or anything else, helps in the storytelling and makes it much more interesting to the people who watch.
Have you had, and I know you've mentioned it, you had someone write to your podcast recently. What has it been like hearing from parents or from just people in the community that have watched your work and it has helped them protect their kids, protect their family. Is it hard to receive that? Is it interesting?
No, it's gratifying. I mean, in the relationship that I have with, loyal viewers and followers is very gratifying to me. I take it very personally. And when somebody writes an email, and I encourage people to do that to chris@predatorpodcast.com, I try to read every one of them. Mm-hmm. I got an email just the other day from a woman who told me that when she was a teenager, she met a guy online who said he was 18, still too old to have a sexual liaison with her. But it happened regardless. And she started binge watching Predator episodes and figured out it was a guy who 3 years prior to that contact had been busted in the Riverside County, California investigation on the Predator series.
Wow.
And this guy is out there. So if he gets busted, is on television, faces criminal prosecution, and he's back out there doing the same thing again. And so she's going to do an interview with me, probably in the next week or so.
That is a...
But imagine that.
Right. No,
But that's the sort of relationship that we have. And that may be an extreme example of the people reaching out, but it's a lot of times these things become future stories.
Right. And I know that your investigations, unfortunately, they are a dark subject and things that a lot of people might have trouble talking about. I want to flip the script just a little bit on to maybe a more bright-sided conversation. Favorite part of your career, things that you've got to do, accomplish, places go, people meet. Is there a couple things or anything that stands out about your career?
Well, I think it's just been an amazing opportunity to see a lot of the world.
Yeah.
I mean, to go to West Africa on a story about Al-Qaeda dealing in blood diamonds to fund terrorism, to go to Europe for, the funeral of Princess Diana, to cover events that only happen once in a lifetime. Now, admittedly, the events I covered tend to be crimes,
right?
9/11, the Oklahoma City bombing, but those opportunities allowed me to witness history.
Yeah.
Or hurricanes. Although I'll tell you a funny story about hurricanes. The joke at NBC was, if you don't want the hurricane to hit your particular town, send Chris Hansen, because no matter what we did, maps get pulled out, the center of the storm's going to hit here. Wherever I went, if I went to Mobile, the storm would hit Pensacola. If I went to
You're
St.
the
Augustine,
opposite Megan.
Yeah, it never had a full-blown hurricane on my watch.
And your son Connor is now in news. I think he was he in Oklahoma City before?
He was in Oklahoma. He started out in northern Michigan. He then went to Oklahoma City. Now he's in Orlando, doing a great job there.
And then your other son works in media as well.
He's behind the scenes, working on a lot of different network crime shows and some independent films. He's in Brooklyn. And it's fun because we get to have a call every once in a while where we criticize each other's hard work and give each other a hard time. No, I'm very proud of both of them. And they're doing phenomenal work. And, they did it on their own. Obviously they grew up around it. I think they found, one on camera, one behind the camera, different parts of that world fascinating. But they don't rely on me. I mean, they'd rather not. I'll get the call if it's like, hey, do you know somebody who dealing with this? But, they operate their own situations. I mean, I had my oldest son and I worked together on a couple different shows, and it was a lot of fun. But, he's got his own book. He does his own thing.
That's got to be a hard tightrope to walk, because you are Chris Hansen and they are your kids, but you don't want to interfere. You want them to go earn it themselves and live their own life.
Yeah, and they're two kids who went to the same schools, ate the same meals, went on the same vacations, just two very different personalities.
Yeah.
And as a parent, you have to figure that out and understand that not everybody wants to do exactly what you want them to do. And they're going to find their own paths. And I consider myself extraordinarily fortunate that both of them have, and they're, self-sufficient and successful and happy. And it's a joy as a father to see that.
And this is just completely random, came to the top of my head. Has there been somebody that you've been able to meet or do an interview with that, I don't know, is a bucket list? Are there places you've gone because of the success of your investigations that...
I have some very memorable interviews with people, and the one that stands out, who I thought was just an amazing human being and didn't come to appreciate it until after the interview, Colin Powell, when he was Secretary of State.
Yeah.
and just a wonderful human being, a great guy who took time. And I'll tell you the quick story. We'd done a story on sex tourism in Cambodia, and we infiltrated a brothel along with an NGO called the International Justice Mission. And so we had producers and cameras go in there as American sex tourists, and we exposed the whole thing. 5-6-year-old kids being exploited for sex.
Jeez. Shocking.
The local authorities raided, rescued 37 kids, went back and did a follow-up story 4 years later, and it was amazing, life-changing experience. And Colin Powell, as Secretary of State, had made this a mission to fight sex trafficking and sex tourism. And so he agreed to an interview.
Yeah.
And we did the interview, and he was to fly out the night of the airing of the show.
Oh, wow.
And we had gotten him transcripts as a courtesy so he could read it on the plane of the entire story. He actually delayed the flight. The official U.S. government Secretary of State jet delayed it so he could watch the show on Dateline.
Wow.
Finished it and ran up the steps of the plane and took off.
That is a really cool story, and you guys got to experience something very powerful together.
Well, yeah, no, it was really quite something. And to this day, I still have Colin Powell's 13 Rules of Success on my dresser, which I refer to every morning as I get ready.
That's awesome. I'll keep you here just for a couple more minutes. Do people get nervous when you walk in a room?
Absolutely. They do.
I mean, like, I set up the cameras and I was interviewing you. Yeah. I asked you to take a seat.
No,
so it was
it's people, and mostly it's, good-natured, joking around, what are you here? What are you doing here?
Yeah.
Or the joke is, how did you meet so-and-so? It was in a dark kitchen in Cincinnati, but it was, it's people have over the years, whether being in a retail store or shopping for something, and people are like, what is he doing? What is he up to? What's he trying to expose? But yeah, I mean, mostly, people recognize you for the work you've done, and they want to chat about it for a minute. And I'll tell you that the really stirring thing to me has been that I can't tell you how many times I've been out in public or out with my wife in public, and somebody will say, hey, can I talk to you for a minute? And they'll tell you the story about how they were victimized as a child, and how this particular franchise, these stories, help them take back some power watching the predators get busted. And to me, that's among the most gratifying things of all of this.
I agree, and that has to be the coolest thing, and I experienced that on a very small level compared to your work. But, I used to be out at bars, and I don't drink anymore, but I used to be out, and people would talk to me about this sporting event or this game, this player. And it turned into, when I started this podcast and this project, was, hey, I had some of these same thoughts. I saw this letter. It made me want to check in. Or, hey, my brother committed suicide. Yeah, exactly. And I think when you can have those real life interactions.
Well, you're doing your part to change somebody's life for the better. And I applaud you for what you're doing, because, it's not always easy.
Yeah.
And it requires some self-examination that may not be comfortable for you.
Sure.
And some growth. You're a young man. You got a lot of things you can accomplish.
Not that young.
Compared to me, you are. But my point is that, to find something that engages you intellectually and to keep you curious about the world.
Yeah.
And people say, when are you going to retire? I said, well, do what?
Yeah.
I have hobbies. I like to, to do a lot of different things, but I don't see retirement anytime soon.
Yeah, you just keep.
I'm too engaged in it.
Yeah, and like we said earlier, you just started True Blue, and it's taken off. I want to give you some time to talk about that. The show is just as enticing and empowering, and just brings you into your TV screen or your phone screen as the To Catch a Predator series, if not more, because like I had mentioned, it is 2022, 2023. What can people expect to see coming up?
Well, we've got the continued series, Takedown with Chris Hansen, on True Blue. It's TRUBLU. Watch trueblue.com for details. And we have just dozens of other enterprise crime documentaries that are about to come out, one of which is The Facebook Fiend, this guy who has been on dating sites all around the country, meeting women, assaulting them physically, sexually, taking their money. And this guy was getting away with it for a decade.
Wow.
And I've got a laundry list of victims whom I've interviewed, and we exposed the guy, and now he's facing criminal charges in 2 different states and probably more to come. But it's because these survivors, these victims, felt empowered by coming to me, and I could go tell their story. And again, here's what True Blue does that no one else can do, which is take a story like that from inception to production in a matter of months to having it on True Blue. We're going to be doing a news magazine show called True Crime Nation on True Blue. We're going to be doing some live shows. We've already experimented with that. And so there's much more to come. The podcast, Predators I've Caught, on all platforms. I go back and examine cases going back years sometimes. Where are they today? I go through the experience in a depth that I wasn't able to do in the moment. So I go back and immerse myself into the video, into the transcripts of the chat, and talk about what happened and the surprising things that I found along the way, looking back, that I didn't know at the time.
Right. And I think it's interesting for viewers and listeners to hear things you talk about from your perspective, because we all watch it and we see certain things, pick up on certain things, but I'm sure you find new things each time you go back, watch it, or talk to somebody.
Yeah. And it's you talk about therapy. I mean, in a way, the podcast is my therapy.
Yeah.
Really, because I go back and relive this and understand it and, experience some emotions I didn't have time to experience back when I was living the initial investigation.
Right. Last thing I want to ask you is, usually I ask for, I might do a 2-part here. Usually I ask my guests advice to somebody that wants to follow in their footsteps, go after an investigative journalism career, which I will definitely still ask you. But because of your field of work and what you've done, and I know there's a lot of parents that listen to this, I'll give a 2-parter. Advice for parents with kids that obviously are on the Snapchats, the dating apps, the social medias of the world. I'll ask you that first. What advice do you give to them?
Parents need to create an environment where a child can come to them and tell them what happened online. Early in the predator investigations, I had a dozen middle schoolers. And I said, show me a hand. How many of you have had an adult approach them in an uncomfortable way? All raise your hands. How many of you told your parents? 2. Why not? We're afraid they take away the computer, the internet, the phone. Sextortion. I've sat with parents whose kids killed themselves because they thought a sexually explicit picture that they had given to someone they thought was a girl ended up being a scam artist from half a world away in Western Africa.
Right.
They couldn't come to grips with the fact in their 15, 16-year-old mind that they were going to get through it. And instead of talking to their parents about it, that mind is not developed enough to see past the initial issue. And these kids have killed themselves. Straight A students, athletes, good kids. The better the kid, the more pressure it seems on them to
perform,
sadly take their own life. And, you got to have a mechanism for your kid to come to you and say, I screwed up. This happened. And these weren't bad parents. These are some of the best parents you could ever want.
Right.
But the kid was just afraid to go do it. And so you have to initiate that conversation with them and say, look, come to me. We have a policy here where if you do this, you're not going to get in trouble for it. Just let me know what's going on. We'll fix it together.
Right. Every parent, and as someone that has been through mental health issues since I was 14, every parent wants to be supportive. And when you're on the other side of it as a kid, you try to figure out,
but sometimes you don't want to hear bad news, you know, and parents today are much better than parents were, 2 generations ago. I mean, people are just more educated and more understanding, but you still have to be proactive and say, look, what's going on? And, I want you to know that if this happens, you can come to me.
Right.
Guys are dopey at 15, 16. I know you're dopey at 15, 16, but if something happens to your dopey self, let's fix it.
Fix it out, or talk it out, fix it, figure out a way to go. All right, so now the second part of that, advice to somebody that is an aspiring journalist, maybe they're in college, high school right now, want to follow your footsteps and go into that investigative journalism.
Well, I think you just have to do it. You have to commit to wanting to do it as a craft. You have to make sure that you are, dedicated enough to get through it, because you're not going to make a lot of money in the beginning. It starts at a very meager salary level, and you work your way up, and it can be extremely rewarding. on the other side once you get through it. But you have to be committed to witnessing history, wanting to know the truth. You have to be intellectually engaged and curious about the world.
Yeah.
And you have to not set limits on yourself, and it's a delicate balance. If you're going to live a regular life with normal relationships, I mean, you make sacrifices.
Sure.
A lot of mine came early in life, and I worked and never left an assignment because it was the end of an 8 or 10 hour workday.
Right.
I didn't do that. I never took all my vacation time. Now, that may not have been the healthiest approach, but, you figure it out along the way. And if you do start a family, then you can adjust. But, it requires a commitment. You have to live it.
You have to love what you do. If
you have to like
journalism.
it. You have to like it, and you have to live it.
Awesome. Well, Chris, you are an absolute legend.
Brandon.
And this has been so much fun.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
I have to say this on record, but it was very cool for me to ask you to have a seat and, and get to experience this conversation with you. You're a hell of a journalist, and it's been really fun.
Thanks for having me. No, I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Next week, we'll see everybody right back here on The Mental Game. And what a great conversation that was with Chris. As you can tell, he still has that legendary voice you've heard on your TV for decades. Chris's new show, like we mentioned, is streaming now on his network, True Blue. It is Takedown with Chris Hansen. And these episodes show that the child predators, they're still out there, and this is a big, big problem, especially with the dating apps and all the social media platforms. It's a really intriguing, important show, and the journalism and the investigations he's doing with law enforcement, they're really compelling, and you can see why this is a big problem in our country. So I can't thank him enough for opening up about his career and his mental health. Go check out Takedown with Chris Hansen. Coming up next week is another big guest. I'm not telling you who it is, but it is an NFL head coach, and I can't wait to share that conversation with you right back here next week on The Mental Game.